Hey, you're watching my official compilation channel, but if you want to see my newest videos as soon as they're uploaded, check out my main channel, Chat History. Alright, enjoy the video. Embarrassing Royal Deaths Part 3. This noble set of nostrils is none other than Charles VIII, the only surviving son of French King Fela, Louis XI. The year is 1483, and thanks to a generous inheritance from his dad's cold corpse, he is now the new French King Fela of France at the angsty age of just 13. But since teenagers aren't the most qualified to rule entire kingdoms, his 22-year-old sister, Anne, took the reins as head of the kingdom until Charles came of age. God, these artists were mean. Now, to her credit, Anne was a pretty solid ruler in her own right, keeping the Kingdom of France afloat for 8 years until Charles's 21st birthday in 1491. She was able to stomp out rebellious nobles and maintain strong royal authority. But now, it was the super schnoz himself up to bat. His first major strategy as King of France was to sign all kinds of peace treaties to make extra super sure that no one was going to invade. After all, the 100 Years' War just ended not that long ago, so he kinda needed some peace of mind. So for a little while, Charles remained on the defensive, until it was time to not do that. If you know geography, you know that just a croissant's throw to the southeast is the Italian peninsula, full of Italians. Around this time, the region consisted of a whole mishmash of kingdoms and republics, with the biggest bit of the boot being the Kingdom of Naples, headed by one King Ferdinand I. He was a dick. So much so that the friggin' Pope of all people encouraged the peaceful Charles to invade and take the kingdom for himself. Side note, Naples once belonged to France, but then Ferdinand's dad, King Alfonso V, yoinked that shit several decades back for the Kingdom of Aragon. You're following all of this, right? So with that plan in his back pocket, the seemingly innocent Pope proceeded to persuade. You like it in Naples? You take it to Naples. Come on, you take it to Naples.
What's he saying about nipples?
Oh. With some questionable encouragement, Charles switched to attack mode, prepping France for full invasion. King Ferdinand, seeing French forces looming on the French horizon, warned his kingdom and allies of the imminent threat before his own departure into the great Bed Bath & Beyond. In his stead was his son Alfonso II, who tried to reason with the invading Charles, telling him that he could take Milan instead, but leave Naples alone. Well, in 1494, Charles did take Milan. And then everything else. This was the first of many Italian wars. A French government was slammed into place, but just a few months later, the Italian peninsula discovered the power of friendship and drove the French from the land, bringing it all to a net zero outcome. Although all the neighboring kingdoms and such now knew that the Italians were easy pickings. Charles frigged off back to France with the goal of rebuilding his army to slap the shit out of some more Italians, but was never able to do so. Despite his ambitions and yearning to conquer in the name of the crown, the substantial mountain of debt that he just incurred prevented any future conquests. War is expensive after all. So unable to make any external changes, he instead looked towards the internal, focusing on cultural expansion and pioneering the French Renaissance. He relished in lavish architecture, the arts, and sports. One particular sport being jeu de paume, or game of the palm. Think tennis, but instead of smacking a ball with a sturdy racket, you did it with your bare hand. Charles just loved watching a bunch of dudes whacking their balls around, but sometimes life's simple pleasures end up cutting that life short. While heading on over to a match on April 7th, 1498, the king accidentally wanged his melon on a stone frame of a low doorway. A temporary moment of embarrassment, but with permanent consequences. The king shrugged it off and continued to watch the game, and everything seemed fine. Until it wasn't. The king collapsed in his seat and fell into a coma. Medical attention was called right away, but King Charles VIII had died just 9 hours later at the age of 27. He left the Kingdom of France fractured and in massive debt. Now, this little mishap is the king's most cited cause of death, but some modern historians claim that neurosyphilis and epileptic fits may have had something to do with it. Luckily though, the king had 6 whole kids to carry on the family lineage. Oh wait, they all died in infancy. Little is really known about Duke Qing of Qin, with limited surviving knowledge of his existence being written in ancient Chinese texts, mainly the famous Zhuochuan, which discusses many ancient Chinese historical figures in the context of moral teachings and symbolism. Well, this poor duke got the short end of the stick with his life lesson. What we do know about dear old Qing was that he was a prominent ruler in the state of Qin during the Eastern Zhou dynasty, somewhere towards the beginning of the 6th century BC. He was regarded as a strong and wise military ruler, having brought peace and cooperation amongst the 6 clans within his own state. All he did was divide the state's existing military into 6 separate branches, one for each of the clans. This kept them happy and loyal, eager to share wisdom and advice on any domestic and foreign affairs to maintain peace. Keep your subjects happy and they won't try to rebel and kill you. Even though he was a man of domestic peace and prosperity, this didn't mean that he couldn't export a few strategic ass whoopings. His strong military coalition allowed the state of Qin to lay some major smackdowns on neighboring warring states during his reign, asserting dominance within the region. It's just a shame that such a prominent figure would be subject to such a bizarre death. According to the classical Chinese text in the Zhuochuan, Qing was suddenly struck with sickness in the summer of 581 BC. Feeling like complete doo-doo, he consulted with a shaman for advice and a prognosis. And it wasn't good. Instead of any sort of useful medical advice, the shaman instead presented the duke with a grim prophecy. You're gonna die, dude. The shaman informed the duke that he had but a short time to live, specifically that he wouldn't live to feast on the wheat of the new harvest season. The duke did not like that, so he had the shaman executed. As a bit of a fuck you, Qing had some farmers reap an unripe crop of wheat and mash it into flour to make a debatably delicious low-poly cake. Horrible idea. The quote-unquote cake only exacerbated his symptoms, leading to frequent tummy troubles. Such rumblies in his tumbly meant that he had to make a poopy and a potty. So, scrambling to the nearest possible shitter, the duke slammed his cheeks down to make a duke of his own. But the slamming of the cheeks was apparently overly aggressive as he fell right through the seat and into the cesspit below. Already in a weakened state due to illness, Qing was quickly overwhelmed by the rotting slop and drowned in the waste. Now, I know what you're thinking. With bizarre deaths such as this, there's often the suspicion of over-exaggeration or falsehoods, with more reasonable explanations for one's passing being brought up in other texts. However, a few other works of the time also mention this exact event, with 0 other sources even alluding to evidence of foul play or even an uneventful natural demise, so Qing is remembered as the duke that fell into a turlet and done drowned. Pretty shitty. With a name like Stanislav Leszczynski, you know this guy was destined for greatness, and he was, kinda. During the Great Northern War, Sweden was just frothing at the gash for some faithful allies to assist in their defense against Russia and the aptly named anti-Swedish coalition, one of which was the Kingdom of Poland. The current Polish monarch, King Augustus II, was a cool guy and all, but wasn't very supportive of the Swedes, so let's just... there we go. Stanislav, one of the Polish king's most vocal opposers, had been installed on the throne by Sweden in 1704, and his rule remained valid as long as Sweden remained undefeated in the Great Northern War. The Swedish got their fish handed to them in 1709, with their king dethroned and forced into exile. With that, Augustus II politely knocked on the Polish royal doors to reclaim his throne. Sad Stanley was swept to the sidelines, but started to strategize. His beautiful cotton swab of a daughter got hitched to King Louis XV of France in 1725, a critical move of politics and power. With the French king now giving the old to his daughter, Stanislav would have a stronger claim to the Polish throne when the time came. And just like the French king, that time came rather quickly. In 1733, Augustus II had a bit of an embarrassing death himself. He went and snapped off an entire toe when entering a carriage. The wound got infected, which, in pre-modern medical terms, means death. Now, you would think that the throne would be passed down to Augustus' son, right? Wrong. The Polish king unfortunately never made the throne a hereditary inheritance, which was a grave mistake. Instead, the throne was formally up for grabs through a royal election. The winner, of course, was none other than Stanislav Leszczynski, so he was made king. Again. However, Russia, the winner of the whole Great Northern War thing, objected, demanding that the throne be rightfully passed to Augustus' son. Thus, a new war began. The War of the Polish Succession. French and Russian forces proceeded to blow each other to bits in Austria over who should be the rightful Polish king. 2 years and 88,000 deaths later, the two agreed on a ceasefire and Stan was forced to surrender the throne. But in my opinion, he made out on the deal. He had to give up his kingship, sure, but he was made Duke of the territories of Lorraine and Bar, living a wealthy and peaceful life in the comfy, cozy countryside, actively ruling the territories and writing philosophy in his spare time. But during one of his relaxing evenings of spitting poetic flames onto parchment in 1766, tragedy struck. Clad in his iconic silk robes, the now 88-year-old Stanislav nodded off near the fireplace. A rogue spark set his clothing ablaze, waking him up in a panic. The fire seared the old man's already withering flesh, resulting in devastating burns. Luckily, nearby servants rushed in and were able to extinguish the flames, but it was too late. Upon examination by his close friend and personal physician, Stanislav suffered severe burns to the left side of his body. His hand was completely burned to the bone. Being a bit of a big boy, Stanislav's stomach was burned as far as 8 centimeters or just over 3 inches under the skin. Over the next 2 weeks, the ex-monarch was slathered in all kinds of lotions and potions, and he seemed to be on the up and up. But then, of course, came the infection. By the 13th day of treatment, the skin on his hand had slid right off, revealing gangrenous sores. He was covered in oozing, festering, and excruciatingly painful wounds. Medical practitioners did anything and everything in their knowledge and power, but the pain and suffering was just too great. Unable to bear even the slightest movement, Stanislav was transferred to his armchair where he painfully passed on February 23, 1766. His territories of Lorraine and Bar transitioned over to French control upon his death, a stipulation that was agreed upon when he became Duke. Word of advice, don't sleep within inches of an open fire unless you want to end up a burnt pile of pus. Rest in peace, Stan. Bela the Bison was a man of great fame, whose physical achievements gave him his name. Vigorous strength and tactical skill forced friends and foes to bend to his will. Power he had, but a crown he had not. In a brother's betrayal he would find himself caught. But blood can be spilled and bond can be broken, if you've only the will and the words to be spoken. Now take caution and heed with what was agreed, your fate will catch up at blistering speed. Heavy is the crown if the throne should be weak, for this king will be lost with a simple squeak. That took me like 20 minutes to write. Anyway, Bela of Hungary was a strong dude, having gained his fame after slapping the socks off of a formidable Pomeranian warrior. No, not the dog, the region. His big brother Andrew was crowned king of Hungary around the year 1046. That was good news for Bela, because thanks to the Hungarian rule of fraternal succession, he would be next in line to the throne in case anything happened to his brother, which, of course, being king, usually meant that something was going to happen to you. And something did, but not from any foreign entity wishing to grab a piece of that land. It was Bela himself. Andrew had completely circumvented that whole tradition of fraternal succession, revising the rules to instead have the crown passed to his own son.
Daddy, I wish to be king, Daddy.
But Andrew famously offered Bela a choice. Take the crown, and probably get assassinated, or take the sword and remain a faithful and noble warrior. Bela took the sword, but had no intention of remaining loyal. After gathering a gaggle of groupies who supported his claim, Bela turned against his brother in 1060 and seized the crown for himself. Andrew died. Now king of the castle, Bela got to work, aiming to sweep his whole just stole the crown move under the rug. He gave clemency to any of his brother's supporters in order to build loyalty and trust, but of course, not everyone was happy with the usurper. That Holy Roman Empire just next door was looking a little kerfuffled, having supported Bela's nephew, Solomon, as the true king. Bela had attempted to compromise with the big scary empire, offering the would-be king lordship, but them Holy Romans shot it down. With no peace treaty in the cards, Bela built up his defenses in anticipation of an invasion, but he knew that this would be futile. Just 3 years into his reign, he planned to give up the throne to his nephew amidst political turmoil, but the throne would be lost sooner than expected. In the summer of 1063, the chronically concerned King Bela sat ever so comfortably on said throne. Yep, according to several medieval chronicles, including the Chronicon Pictum, a 14th century Hungarian compilation of 11th and 12th century records, Bela's own throne collapsed out from underneath him. Was it sabotage? Karma? Poor craftsmanship? Who knows? Now, he was still alive, but Bila was seriously injured from the whole debacle, reportedly seeming half dead. Well, he became full dead several weeks later, succumbing to his injuries in September of 1063 at the age of 45. That little nephew of his ended up taking back the throne. After it was properly repaired, of course. Archduchess Matilda of Austria didn't really get to accomplish much in her life. That's because she was only 18 when she crossed over into the Shadow Realm, unfortunately by her own mistake. And boy was it a doozy. Matilda came from a powerful family lineage. Her grandfather, Archduke Charles of Austria, was a key figure in defeating Napoleon Bonaparte in the Napoleonic Wars. Her great-grandfather, Leopold II, was the brother of Marie Antoinette and the penultimate emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. So she had some huge shoes to fill. Now, unfortunately for Matilda and most noble women throughout history, this usually meant that you were just going to be married off to someone powerful for political gain, which was the case. Matilda was to be betrothed to the Crown Prince of Italy in an attempt to turn down the temperature on some heated relationships between Italy and the newly formed Austria-Hungary, because marriage always helps fix bad relationships. However, these marital celebrations would never come to be. You see, young Matilda was a woman of habit, a bad habit. Since she lived in such a state of stress, she savored the smoking of cigarettes. Of course, her father wasn't too keen on this tendency of tobacco dependency, often warning her of the dangers of such a habit. This habit is dangerous. He also warned her of the many health risks. There are many health risks. Finally, he had straight up forbidden her from smoking. But all of those foreboding flashbacks didn't prevent the Archduchess from indulging. One evening in May of 1867, Matilda was getting ready to attend the theater, dressing up in her finest, poofiest, most combustible dress. After fitting into the thing, she fancied herself a tobacco snacky, lighting one up for a few quick drags. Whilst puffing away, her ear holes detected the vibrations of footsteps approaching. Her father's footsteps. In a panic, she carelessly concealed the cigarette in the back folds of her dress. "All ready to go to the theater, my dear?" he said in whatever language Austrians speak. Ach, very good. You aren't smoking in here, are you? Nein. Okay then, off we go. The poor girl's dress ignited in a roar of flames. Her blood-curdling screams alerted servants to attempt to extinguish the fire. They were successful, but the damage was done. The Archduchess's neck, her back, her arms, and her crack all suffered severe second and third degree burns. She was alive, but in critical condition. Ugh, so no theater? For more than 2 weeks, Matilda received around-the-clock care for her wounds. Similar to poor Stanislav from before, the medical knowledge at the time surrounding treatment of severe burns remained limited. No more than just lathering ointments and bandages and hoping for healing. The crucial process of removing dead skin and applying antiseptics just wasn't standardized or even practiced yet. This resulted in victims succumbing to deadly infections from the fetid flesh. Matilda's wounds turned gangrenous as the infection continued to spread. Despite medical efforts, she died from her self-immolation injuries on June 6, 1867. Remember, that smoking kills. Unless you're smoking a tender rack of ribs. The majority of Alexander's life was nothing short of chaotic, and it was in no small part thanks to the events surrounding World War I. Dear old dad King Constantine I set a Greek policy of neutrality when Europe was banging away at itself during the Great War. This was neutral on paper, but Constantine's familial ties to the German crown had him leaning in that direction. I mean, he was married to Kaiser Wilhelm's sister for Pete's sake. No need to piss off the in-laws. Instead, he ended up pissing off his own people. His political stance angered the Greek prime minister, who went and tattled to the Triple Entente of Russia, France, and Great Britain. Fearing a new potential enemy, they decided to nip Greece in the bud. In 1917, Constantine was thrown off his throne, surrendering it to his younger, more easily manipulated son, Alexander. Alex regrettably accepted the crown at age 23. You see, even though he was now king, Alex knew that he held no real power. That was instead now transferred to the prime minister. Now viewed as traitors, Alex's family was cast into exile. As for Alex himself, he fled Athens to his family's summer home in Tatoi, which is like right up the road. Seriously, it's like a half-hour drive. But it was here that Alex suffered what he thought was a rather inconsequential wound. Well, he was about to be proven very wrong. While out on a stroll on the palace's property, Alex noticed that his pet dog was getting bullied by one of the palace's steward's pet monkeys. He rushed over to break up the fight, but was intercepted by a second monkey bearing vicious fangs. Macaque! That's right, a Barbary macaque. The monkey chomped Alex right on his chest and on his leg. Luckily, he was able to fend off the beasts, returning home to assess the situation. The bites were small, so Alex wasn't too terribly worried. His wounds were hastily cleaned and dressed, but not properly disinfected. You can probably guess where this is going. Just a few meager hours later, Alex developed a crippling fever. The wounds had already developed an infection, and sepsis was beginning to set in. Sepsis, in case you didn't know, is your body's "oh fuck" response to a severe infection. Your immune system goes into crazy maximum overdrive to fight off said infection, but can very well end up killing you as it tries to save you. Unfortunately for Alex, his doctors could not control his fever and considered amputation of the affected leg to minimize further spread of the infection. Neither doctor wanted the figurative and literal blood on their hands. The king's condition worsened over the following weeks before he finally bit the dust on October 25th, 1920 at the age of 27. Never mess with monkeys. They are no joke. Evil kings doing evil things. Again. It's always a roll of the dice when slapping a quivering child on the throne. Will they mature into a fair and caring leader, or will they go goo goo gaga bonkers and tear the country asunder? Well, it really depends on whoever raises them. For the case of young Charles IX, he was screwed from the get-go. Born in the Saint-Germain-en-Laye commune in north-central France back in old 1550, young Chuck had a lot to look forward to. He was the prince after all. Surely once his dear old dad had passed at a reasonably old age after bequeathing decades of knowledge and wisdom to his growing boy, Charles would do well to carry on that legacy. It's just too bad that Chuck's dad, Henry II, caught a honkin' hunk of splintered wood in his eyeball during a jousting tournament and died from an infection. Quite an embarrassing death, wouldn't you agree? But an embarrassing death is a death nonetheless, so for a reign to progress, a prince must acquiesce his distress and take to the throne with success. After his older brother died, of course. There we go. Now up to bat, Charles took the throne in 1560. The mathematically astute among you will realize that in 1560, the new monarch would be only 10. And you're correct. The compact little croissant was now king, but he couldn't reign his way out of a cloud. So until Charles came of age, the big britches of power were instead passed on to his mother, Catherine de' Medici, and she had plans of her own. It's important to acknowledge that during this time in France, there was a lot of religious squabbling, mainly between Catholics and Protestants. They both believe in the same God, sure, it's just that their teachings are slightly different, but different enough to kill each other. The Catholics were in the majority, with the Protestants, mainly a subsect called the Huguenots, being the persecuted rebellious few, making up about 10% of France's population. With ongoing violence slowly escalating over the years, Catherine proposed the Edict of January, basically stating, "Alright, we'll tolerate y'all, but cut the shit, behave yourselves, and follow the rules." But the more committed Catholics of the French government weren't too pleased with, at the very least, putting up with all of these heretical Protestants. One such outraged individual was Francis, Duke of Guise. He already had a bad experience with the Huguenots, having recently uncovered a plot to have him removed from power. His resulting rage culminated in the massacre of Vassy, where the aforementioned Duke found a stronghold of worshipping Huguenots gathered in a church on his land. So he killed a bunch of them. This event kicked off the first of several religious wars in France. But what does all of this have to do with Charles? Well, during the years of the on and off wars between the Catholics and the Protestants, Charles became a target. He had avoided assassination and abduction attempts from the Huguenots, making it harder for the king to empathize with them. After turning 13, Charles declared himself old enough to rule on his own, granting himself full authority, though he remained heavily influenced by Mama Medici. With thousands of his own people dead and royal coffers running dry, Charles needed to end these wars once and for all. So he hatched a plan. He had arranged the marriage between his very Catholic sister Margaret and devout Huguenot leader Henry of Navarre as an act of good faith and a final peace offering. The most wealthy and influential of the Huguenot leaders flocked to witness the wedding, but many would not make it home. With growing concerns and paranoia surrounding the influx of Huguenot leaders, Charles and his mother feared that a rebellion was on the horizon. So, on August 22, 1572, under the influence of his mother, Charles ordered the execution of Admiral Gaspard de Coligny, one of the main Huguenot leaders in town.
Mind your own business!
This murder sparked the infamous Bartholomew's Day Massacre, a systematic slaughtering of thousands of Huguenots within Paris. Homes and shops were raided, pillaged, and destroyed, and bodies were disrespectfully dumped in the Seine. Wanting to take advantage of the uprising as a way to strangle any remaining life of the Huguenots' power once and for all, some historians believe that Charles pushed for the violence to extend beyond the city, despite calling for an end to the violence a few days later to save face. Over the course of the next several weeks, tens of thousands of Huguenots were executed. The massacre, however, had the opposite effect. Unsurprisingly, the Protestants were now properly pissed off, initiating more religious wars that would last for another 26 years. King Charles would never live to see peace. The aftermath of the massacre drove the young king insane, shifting between bouts of boasting and remorse. One day he would be bragging about the extremity of the brutal bloodshed, while the next he claimed to be haunted by the screams of his victims. His mental health got flushed down the shitter as he constantly expressed immense grief over the incident. It also didn't help that Mama Medici made her son feel worse, giving him the full blame and declaring him a raving lunatic. In his now vulnerable and weakened state, the young king contracted tuberculosis in spring of 1574. King Charles IX coughed himself into the great beyond a few months later at the age of 23. Now, when you have a damning title like The Cruel, which admittedly is badass in and of itself, it's most likely one that was earned through various acts of ferocity, or just being a downright dick. So let's take a look at what Peter I of Castile did to obtain it. Born in 1334, the pint-sized Peter Pokemon evolved into a 6-foot-tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, chiseled chap. A hard worker and well-educated, the young prince had the qualifications to become a great leader, but he was being led by a bad example: his father. Daddy Alfonso XI was a ruthless king, but in that day and age, you kinda had to be. If you're too lenient, you're gonna get steamrolled by your enemies, but if you're too tyrannical, you're gonna catch a knife between your blades.
Power!
Alfonso, a man of strategy, worked tirelessly to expand his kingdom, arresting and executing any and all political opponents, often without trial. So it's pretty obvious where Peter's future policies may have been influenced. In 1350, King Alfonso XI himself caught an influential case of the Black Plague, which was ravaging Europe at the time, and ultimately dissolved from the throne, leaving it open to Peter. The determined prince donned the crown and became king of the Iberian kingdoms of Castile and Leon that same year. But it wasn't exactly a peaceful transition. Alfonso had a mistress who shot out multiple sons, half-brothers to Peter who wanted the throne for themselves, one in particular being Enrique. But we'll get to that later. King Peter was just 16 at the time of his crowning, so he sometimes took political advice from his still-alive mother. One such piece of advice was marrying the alliterative 14-year-old Blanche of Bourbon in 1353. Do you, King Peter, take Blanche to be your wife for life? Clearly not thrilled with this venture, Peter, just 2 days after marriage, abandoned Blanche for his side chick and ultimate love interest, Maria de Padilla, with whom he married in secret before Bland asked Blanche. They had 4 babies together. Yeah, that's how it works. As for Blanche, it's actually kind of a sad story. Peter not only abandoned her, but had her imprisoned in a town near the southernmost point of the Iberian Peninsula, far away from the kingdom. Though she was briefly a queen, Blanche died in captivity in 1361 under mysterious circumstances. Some historians believe that she was either poisoned or caught a crossbow bolt in the skull under Peter's command, though this is debated. Pretty cruel if you ask me. However, during his reign, Peter also earned the title of Peter the Just from his supporters. The king had attempted to centralize power away from wealthy nobles, giving platform to commoners and minority populations, particularly Jews and Muslims. The nobles, unsurprisingly, did not like that one bit. But since the king was king and all, any nobles who felt particularly rebellious or treasonous were given a peaceful view of the horizon, from a hanging rope. This trouble and turmoil among the ranks inspired a desire for someone to overthrow the crazed king. And who should show up but the various half-brothers from before? After many rebellions staged by said half-brothers, Peter captured and executed them all, including their mother. One brother was reportedly hacked to pieces as Peter looked on with a shit-eating grin. However, one brother managed to escape. Enrique evaded capture and fled to France, where he started to gather allies under French King John II. This caught the attention of another Peter, Peter of the neighboring kingdom of Aragon. Thus began the War of the Two Peters in 1356. Castile proceeded to kick Aragon's shit in, but Aragon had an ace up its sleeve. Yup, he was back. And now he was also backed by Aragon and the French. Enrique infiltrated Castile and actually managed to dethrone Peter, who ran away to England for backup in order to exact revenge, which he did. Peter regained his throne after the Battle of Nájera in 1367, but he failed to properly thank and pay tribute to the English for their help. Bad move. Now back at the helm, Peter systematically tortured and executed any and all nobles whom he deemed supportive of Enrique, oftentimes without proof. Peter lived in pure paranoia for the next few years, failing to trust any advisors or nobles, leading to a collapse in political power. Seeing the perfect opportunity for a critical final strike, Enrique attacked once more with the Battle of Montiel in March of 1390. Peter was defeated and was stabbed in the freaking face with a knife by his half-brother, who finally took the throne for good. Until he died of heart failure a decade later. In Chinese history, Di Xin of the Shang dynasty is a textbook example of how greed, corruption, and tyranny can twist a leader into moral depravity. After his death, Di Xin was given the posthumous title of King Zhou, with Zhou being the name of the part of a saddle that wraps around a horse's tail and brushes along its butthole. That's a rather creative insult, so you know this guy messed up something awful. Now, being an ancient king and all, historians are forced to rely on often very heavily exaggerated and embellished stories and legends, so for this chapter, take what you will with a grain of salt. Also, forgive my pronunciations. And also subscribe. Alright. King Butthole Strap began his reign in 1075 BC. According to ancient Chinese historian Sima Qian, the king was an exceptionally gifted fella, able to outsmart any opponent and strong enough to successfully hunt with nothing more than his bare hands. Doubtful, but whatever. Paired up with his favorite consort, the lovely and sadistic Da Qi, the two became a powerhouse of torture and torment for those unfortunate enough to be in their vicinity. Although remembered as a competent strategist, able to expand his empire through military campaigns, the king was blinded by his infatuation with Da Qi and drained the kingdom's coffers on extravagance. He was the king, and he truly wanted to live like one. According to legend, King Zhou would stop at nothing to fulfill the wishes of Da Qi, going as far as to build an elaborate palace garden crammed full of rare and exotic animals. Well, that's not too bad, you might say, with a bit of drool on your chin. Well, how about forcing royal subjects to drink from a freshly dug out wine pond or eat meat from hanging tree limbs? Oh yeah, they were all naked too. Where's all the hanging meat? I think I found it. These breezy brunches, along with any other over-the-top nonsensical nonsense, was funded solely by the taxpayers, which pissed them off.
You stupid!
The king's public support was nearly non-existent. It's just too bad that any outspoken individuals were subject to immediate imprisonment and torture. One such torture was the roasting beam, an invention of the king's own design. A long, hollow bronze beam positioned over a roaring fire. The roasting beam was stuffed with searing hot coals, transferring their heat to the highly thermoconductive bronze. The king would also take the time to grease up his long pole. According to legend, King Zhou had forced prisoners to walk across the pole, promising release if they were successful. They weren't. An alternate version of this torture device was flipped 90 degrees, a bronze column to which the victim was chained while a fire roared beneath them, cooking the victim to a delicate medium rare. You know, firm, but with a little give. The king and his main squeeze would reportedly revel in the pain inflicted on their prisoners, seeing the torment as pure cinema. Now, when you live life in excess and are tyrannical and maniacal dickbags to your starving and suffering subjects, it's pretty easy to understand that said subjects are going to want to murder you. Like, passionately murder you. King Zhou's relatives begged him to change his ways and shift towards a noble and kind rule. He would not be persuaded. At least, not until this handsome bag of biscuits showed up. This is Chifa of Zhou. Now, to clear some things up here, Zhou is not Zhou. This is Zhou. This is Zhou. Different inflection, different words. I don't know, man. The Chinese language is complicated. While evil-ass King Zhou was getting his rocks off watching dudes burn, Chifa was gathering an army. Refusing to be threatened, the king answered the call of war in the Battle of Moye in 1046 BC, but ultimately got his metaphorical socks knocked off so hard that he faced defeat. The greedy king then retreated into his palace, surrounded himself with his treasures, and, symbolic of the gilded dumpster fire that was his reign, set everything, including himself, ablaze at the age of 59. Da Qi, hearing of her beloved king's death, logged out of the server by strangling herself. Da Qi was ultimately blamed for the king's erratic behavior, believed by many to have been possessed by a demonic nine-tailed fox spirit, Naruto style. And thus, with the death of King Zhou, the Zhou dynasty came into power. How about that? The word terrible is tossed around like a frisbee at a blind picnic. So much so that it's lost its original meaning. Like the word literally. Sure, terrible can mean something exceptionally bad, but it also means something that instills terror or is sinister in nature, in essence, of pure evil. See, there's a difference between, ugh, this is terrible, and which is why Ivan was named as such, making for a terrible yet shareable parable. Continuing the trend in this video, Ivan began his reign young, being only 16 when crowned Tsar of all Russia in 1547. His early years as ruler were actually pretty peaceful and progressive. The Tsar had revised law code, established a standing army, and granted the rights of self-government to rural regions. But in 1553, Ivan was stricken with a near-fatal illness. Weak and weary on his deathbed, Ivan requested that his closest nobles swear allegiance to his son in the event of his death. Please, my son.
I require many soggy oats.
What the fuck is that thing? They refused. This prompted Ivan to enact his Plan B. Ivan's health eventually recovered, unlike his trust in his supposedly loyal nobles. The Tsar pushed to expand Russian territory with the hope of opening up opportunistic trade routes. Naturally, this instigated several battles of territorial control. Ivan saw many a success, but each at a deep cost of Russian resources. And then in 1558 came the Livonian War, a war aimed at taking control of Old Livonia, which would grant Russia much-needed access to the Baltic Sea. Facing off against the kingdoms of Sweden and Poland, along with Lithuania and other European strengths, Russia was devastated. The cost of this war threw the country into economic ruin, and it was only downhill from there for poor Ivan. Famine and drought ravaged the land, his friggin' wife died, and various betrayals caused the Tsar to spiral into a manic depression, even going as far as writing a letter of resignation from the throne. The nobles, terrified to rule the country themselves, begged for Ivan's return, which he agreed, but on one condition. He would be granted absolute power over every aspect of the country, including, and most importantly, the right to execute any traitors of the crown. They hesitantly agreed. Thus, Ivan returned to power with a tight, unrelenting grip. He immediately established the Oprichniki, his very own personal guard. In exchange for wealth and privilege, these soldiers were Ivan's eyes and ears around the country, given the job of sniffing out any potential disloyalty. That great power remained completely unchecked. Under Ivan's rule, they executed and exiled thousands of nobles, seized their land, and harshly oppressed peasants. And things only got worse. By 1570, the iconic plague, TM, tore through the country, killing thousands by the day. Novgorod, one of Russia's most prominent cities, was crippled by plague, famine, and Ivan's ruthless rulings. Ivan himself feared that the entire city would defect to Lithuania, because, yeah, that Livonian War was still going on during all of this, and so he decided to make a preemptive strike. In January of 1570, Ivan's Oprichniki invaded the city and began their reign of terror. Those attempting to escape found it impossible, as Ivan's forces had barricaded the city. They were trapped. Captives were tortured for information about their supposed plans for the betrayal of the crown, but none could speak of a truth that didn't exist. Citizens were either burned alive or tied up and thrown into the freezing river, suffocating under the ice. Farms surrounding the city were completely destroyed, condemning any already starving survivors to death without any possible sustenance. By the end of the massacre a few weeks later, thousands of people lay dead in Ivan's wake. Any and all valuables from homes, shops, and churches were stripped, taken back to Ivan's home in Moscow, and divided amongst the Oprichniki soldiers. The Tsar's brutality had truly hit an apex, but it would soon hit a bit too close to home. On November 16, 1581, Ivan got in a heated argument with his 27-year-old son after having savagely beaten his pregnant daughter-in-law Yelena for being inappropriately dressed. The father-son altercation quickly rose to a boiling point, and Ivan lashed out, striking a single fatal blow across his son's head with a heavy cane. He had killed his own son. Worse yet, Yelena miscarried just hours later due to her injuries. Ivan collapsed to the ground, a broken man, holding his son's corpse. Before him flashed his own life of desolation and despair. After the incident, Ivan became remorseful for his past actions. In his final years, the Tsar had agreed to a truce with Lithuania, finally ending the 24-year-long Livonian War. He tied up all loose ends and made peace with himself, but this didn't stop his physical deterioration. By 1584, Tsar Ivan was a frail man. Although only 53, decades of physical and mental anguish destroyed his body and mind, not to mention long-term effects from mercury addiction. On March 28, 1584, Ivan suffered a stroke and died while playing a game of chess, causing two kings to fall at once. Well, now you've done it. You fell down a weird witch's wormhole and landed yourself in ancient Egypt. So, can you survive? Let's find out. The first thing you might ask is, which ancient Egypt? Because the entirety of ancient Egypt spanned across several thousands of years with quite a few different eras. Let's go with, the iconic New Kingdom, the height of Egyptian power and influence, and the most documented for research purposes. How convenient. Since you made it to this video, I'm going to assume that you're not a literal mouth-breathing, knuckle-dragging, fragile infant. So you can give yourself a pat on your freshly whipped back, because you've already survived the hardest part, childhood. Being a kid wasn't easy. Since they didn't have any fancy beeping machines to hook moms up to and keep babies alive, infant mortality rates were extremely high. 20 to 50% of babies didn't make it out the womb. If you survived being born, next up was surviving the world, much harder. With things like disease, hunger, and other environmental factors out to get you, it's not going to be a stroll through Easyville. I mean, some of these kids look so frail you could practically see their blinking health bar. Hang in there, guys. Oh, bummer. Your main duty as a kid is to help out the family that brought you into this world. We're talking chores, taking care of your siblings, protecting the farm, learning the family business, everything necessary for survival. As far as food, it's whatever mama and papa could scrape together, which is mainly bread, milk, fruits, and veggies. Ever have half an onion on dry bread with warm milk? It's actually pretty disgusting, but it's what keeps you growing. Because if you don't eat, well... And hey, if your papa has a high enough fishing level, he could bring home a pretty sweet catfish to tear into. Get that protein. Your mother, assuming she survived slopping you out of her belly, would feed and care for your ungrateful ass. But none of that is applicable since you just got orphaned by the space-time continuum. Before we take a look at what to do next, let's see where you would fit in the grand scheme of society, because everyone has their place. Ancient Egyptian society worked in a hierarchy with rich and powerful guys at the top and everyone else at the not top. So really no change from the modern world. The head honcho around these parts is the pharaoh. He's the divine king and whatever he says, goes. Subscribe. Just under him are his closest bros and advisors. Then we have an educated and skilled middle class, and then a laboring lower class with slaves and servants at the bottom, which were usually foreign prisoners of war. Since there's a 95% chance that you'd stick out like a turd in a punch bowl amongst a well-tanned, weird-talking population, you'd probably be captured and sold into slavery. Tough break, outsider. But let's assume you can convince the xenophobic guards that you're one cool dude. Hey, I'm one cool dude. It worked. Time to get a job. Since you can't speak Wingdings 3, you're gonna have to prove your worth through manual labor. Luckily, there's plenty of jobs to choose from like farming and... Over 90% of all ancient Egyptians were farmers, so there's plenty of friends and rivals to be made. You know, see who could grow the best onions or whatever it is farmers did for fun, finger each other's cabbages, I don't know. But your absolute best friend is the Nile River, which is your #1 source of delicious brown water for your crops. Just don't taste test it. Thankfully, the application process to work on a farm is no more than moving a rock from here to there. And with your stellar gamer build, you can easily get the job done. Just remember to lift entirely with your back. As a bonus, you can read and write, not in hieroglyphics, but in cooler things like letters and numbers, perfect for taking your own notes. You're hired. Now you can get to work and earn that bread. But since the Persians haven't invaded yet and introduced proper currency, you'll be working for literal bread. So you slave away for months on Bahir's family wheat farm, eating your brown bread and sandy beer dinners while sleeping on a filthy, crusty, dusty dirt floor. Watch out for snakes, they bite. Day in and day out, you swing your sickles and your hoes, dreaming about the hoes you left behind, taking extra caution not to get too distracted. Oh, looks like you cut off Bahir's arm. Bahir will remember that. It's then you look down and notice some squishing between your toesies. The ground's getting rather moist. Ah, the Nile's flooding, you say to no one. After you finish fighting off the invading river rats using your +7 strength copper sword, it's time to pause the farming grind and try your hand at construction while the Nile does its thing. Oh look, the pharaoh wants you to help build a new pyramid. Lucky you. Since you have countless hours placing virtual cobblestone under your belt, this sounds like a pretty sweet gig. Just keep an eye out, because sometimes it's not yourself that you need to watch out for. Daily labor is just part of your worry though, because you still have diseases like slaves are the hot and trending collectible at the time. You could even trade them to your friends if you're feeling generous enough. I got trachoma. Well, I've got 1st edition smallpox, check it out. With your 21st century wrinkle brain, you know that you need to keep clean to prevent disease, so you take a dip in the Nile to wash your many crevices. Just downstream of the laundry, which is downstream of the town's dumping grounds. Uh-oh, looks like you picked up a friend. A parasitic flatworm went and crawled up your roundworm, and now you have schistosomiasis. With that comes a fever and aggressive diarrhea. And since we're in ancient times, you know what that means. But little wriggling worms aren't the only threats you face. Like the infected fellas a minute back found out, there were many different diseases sickening up the land. The most popular being tuberculosis, smallpox, and malaria. These guys would make sure that your stay in ancient Egypt would be a quick one, so be sure to swat some skeeters and tell your neighbors to cover their coughs for Ra's sake. Oh, sorry, I thought that there was a mosquito on you. Yeah, you too. Anyway, you get back to chiseling some sandstone blocks and, oh, looks like you caught Pharaoh checking out the goods. He admires your strong physique, attention to hygiene, and glistening back sweat. He even heard about your conquering of the river rats, and he's impressed. Those are some good qualities. Good qualities for a soldier. You just got bumped up a few societal ranks, look at you go. Oh, Pharaoh wants to expand his empire. Well, now your promotion makes sense. Time to go to war. Being a soldier can't be too hard, right? You just pick up a shield and a sword and swing it a little. After all, people are just bigger rats. Oh sweet, they even have the cool curved swords.
Curved swords?
It's called a khopesh, and boy does it hurt. But if swinging a sword ain't your style, you could opt for something a little less slashy and a little bit more stabby. If you want to poke someone further away but still want to be close enough to revel in their death, I recommend a spear or a javelin. If you really have the urge to stab someone at least a few thousand scarabs away, go for the simple and sweet bow and arrow. It never fails. Unless you miss. Alright, time to step onto the sandy battlefield and fight for a country you just fell into. The enemies of the day are the Sea Peoples. No one really knows who they were, and they most likely came from somewhere north of the Mediterranean. But Pharaoh don't give a good gosh dang. They've been flaunting their stupid looking boats and shit for the last time. Fuck you, Egypt! Oh, it's so on. Now, the first thing you're gonna wanna do is... Oh, damn. Alright, let's try that again, respawn. Okay, quick time dodge the arrow, fire your own. Oh, nice shot. Good arc, stable flight, and... Ugh, right on target. Good job murdering that guy with absolutely no complex backstory or family that he was fighting to protect from invaders. To him, you were the bad guy, but hey, war is hell, isn't it? You keep popping off shots and taking out numerous expendable enemy NPCs. While you continue to just riddle the battlefield with arrows, you notice something in your peripheral. Not something, someone. Oh, hey Bahir. Didn't know you were a soldier. Oh, thank God. It was just a dream. Unluckiest deaths in history. Ever read about the unusually tragic death of some historical figure, or even just the random old lady across the street and think, oh, that sucks? Well, you're in for a few more of those. Starting off this list is Francois Vatel, one heck of a perfectionist. He was the maître d'hôtel, or maître d', for French nobility. In case you didn't know, a maître d' is the master of the house, basically a general in terms of waitstaff at a restaurant or overall event. They make sure that everything is in line from decorations to food and that all guests are always happy. Now, if you've ever worked in any form of customer service, you know how stressful this can be, especially when you can't tell your guests to frig off because they're literal royalty. Unlike customers today who just think they are. Francois was in a career of pure stress, but he was the best at what he did, having been formally recognized by many top chefs across France for his ability to ensure guest satisfaction. I mean, how often do you hear stories about royal servants? Almost never, except for Francois. History often mistakes Francois for being a chef himself, but that was never the case. He just handled everything in the front of house. Anyway, this story begins and ends all the way back in 1671 in Fancy Pants, France. It was at this time that France was experiencing a golden age under Supreme French King Overlord Leaderfella Louis XIV, France's and history's longest known reigning monarch to date. This big bushel of baguettes ruled for almost 72 and a half years. Under his rule, French power expanded across the world, arts and culture were flourishing, and the wealthy were living in utmost extravagance. Sure, there were plenty of wars going on in the background, but that's for the poor people to worry about. With such mindless self-indulgence pouring out of every orifice, parties, galas, celebrations, shindigs, and balls were just the norm. But these royal retreats demanded a professional to ensure that everyone kept a crusty yellow smile on their dusty white faces. That's where Francois came in. Having a strong resume of serving under notable French figures you've probably never heard of, like this guy and that guy, Francois was given the task of organizing a banquet in King Louis's honor for over 3,000 people. That's 3,000 of the most rich and powerful people of the age. You don't want to disappoint them, do you? You can't. It's not an option. Do you know what they would do to someone who messed up the king's banquet? Well, that option wouldn't be invented for another 100 years, but it's a quick end no matter how you cut it. The feast was to last across 3 days, and Francois was given just 2 weeks to prepare. So with no time to waste, he nervously took to the task. Over the next 15 days, Francois managed to get all of his French ducks in a row. Drapes were draped, silverware sparkled, chandeliers shimmered, and guests were gobsmacked. All 6,000 of them. Yeah, over double the anticipated party size showed up. Luckily, there was still plenty of food to spare. But another kick in the dick for Francois was the fact that it was raining, canceling the planned fireworks for the evening, which bummed out several of the guests. Well, that's just uncontrollable circumstances, you might say, as you pull out your brown tooth. But not to Francois. Remember, he was a perfectionist, and things were not perfect. Besides these 2 minor infractions, the first day went off without a hitch, but the second day would prove to be Francois' last. In the morning, Vatel received devastating news. Only half of his fish order for the breakfast buffet had arrived. He knew that without the precious poisson, people would be palpably peckish. This was the last straw. Francois spiraled into a panic, knowing that he had failed in his duties and he would forever feel the crushing weight of his shame for the rest of his life. But the rest of his life wouldn't actually be that long, as shortly after receiving the news and breaking down into an inconsolable mess, Francois rushed into his bedchambers to right his wrong the only way he knew how. Standing by his bedside, he brandished his iconic ceremonial stabbing sword and rammed it through his own tummy. He laid in a puddle of his own blood, undiscovered for some time until, "Yo, Francois, the rest of the fish is here." Yeah, that's right. The remainder of the order arrived almost immediately after Francois decided to carry out a permanent solution to a temporary problem. His body was then taken from the palace and buried in secret while the rest of the guests partied on. Nearly every aspect of Isadora Duncan's life could be summarized by one word: tragic. Childhood? Tragic. Adult life? Tragic. Family? Tragic. Career? Successful and groundbreaking. but then tragic. All of this capped off by her sudden, unlucky, and tragic death. Born and raised in the sparkling cesspit that is San Francisco, California in the 1800s, things were already not off to a great start. She was the youngest of 4, with a loving mother and supportive and wealthy banker father, until his bank collapsed under mysterious and fraudulent circumstances, subsequently leading to a marital collapse under mysterious and infidelitous circumstances. He then died in a boat crash several years after that. It is said that his last words were somewhere in the ballpark of, so, after Papa's bank went rupt and her parents defaulted on their marriage, the struggles really stacked up. She lived with her mother and siblings, moving to Oakland, California to begin life anew. She attended school from ages 6 to 10, but dropped out, finding the schooling system restrictive, boring, and lame. Instead, Isadora and her siblings earned their daily bread by teaching the local yokels the art of dance. Thankfully, years of doing the hokey pokey allowed Isadora to turn herself around. After all, that's what it was all about. She joined a formal theater company at the age of 19 to expand her art. Problem was, the extent of dance at the time was very rigid and emotionless. Instead, Isadora yearned for something a little bit more free-flowing and expressive. She wanted less of this, and a little bit more of this. But the dance community in America wasn't ready to pick up what she was throwing down, so she had to search for better opportunities abroad. Well, that was definitely a good choice because she soon found herself dancing in the presence of wealth and royalty across London.
Oh, it's a beautiful dancer, isn't it?
And Paris.
I'm le deux fromage.
Her revolutionary style took the world of dance by storm. With her newfound success, she wished to provide better opportunities for the youth, opportunities that she wished that she had as a spry sapling. In order to do so, she opened up an informal dance school in Berlin, Germany in 1904, which, along with teaching kids their ABCs and 1, 2, 3, also put interpretive dance on the menu, not as a profession, but as a hobby and method of expression. After about a decade, Isadora left to open up a second school in Paris after a certain Austria started getting hungry for conflict. Unfortunately, the new school didn't last very long as tensions escalated and the Great War broke out in Europe, so she fled back home to the US right when the getting was good. As for her personal life, her travels introduced her to many suitable bachelors across the art world. She found love multiple times, and Cupid shuffled into the sheets, popping out 3 kids. But of course, fate would have other plans for this happy chapter. For instance, one of her children died in infancy. The other 2 cruised along in a car with their caretaker and crashed into the River Seine. They drowned. Understandably, Isadora spiraled into a deep depression in her later years and fell out of the spotlight, her debts piling up as high as her empty liquor bottles. But this life of misfortune was about to be topped off with a disastrous bow. On September 14th, 1927 in Nice, France, Isadora was riding shotgun in a fancy car while wearing an abnormally long fancy scarf. Normally, the combination of heavy machinery and loose articles of clothing warrant a live leak watermark, and poor Isadora was about to learn why. As the vehicle sped off and she bid her farewells, her fashionable fabric forged her fate. Her long scarf that was whipping in the wind became entangled in the rear tire of the car, wrapping around the rear axle and pulling tight. In an instant, the scarf became a noose, and Isadora's neck was snapped before she could even react. At just 50 years old, the spotlight faded on the inspirational dancer. Now trust me, for the life of me, I really want to pronounce this guy's name as Tycho Brahe, but apparently the proper Danish pronunciation is Tycho Brahe. Like, listen to this.
Tycho Brahe, Tycho Brahe, Tycho Brahe.
Person saying this doesn't even sound confident in their own pronunciation. Anyway, teeny tiny Tycho was the talk of the town back in the 16th century. He was renowned as one of the world's greatest astronomers and one of the last great astronomers before the invention of the telescope. So these guys were just raw dogging the heavens trying to figure it all out.
Hey, is that a new star up there?
Oh, where?
Right over...
Oh, nope. I lost it. But that of course didn't discourage the celestial sillybillies from trying to figure out how the known universe worked, or at least what the human eye could see. Born an heir to many of the Kingdom of Denmark's noble families, Tycho was loaded, and thus well-educated. He made several breakthroughs in the field of astronomy, and even dabbled in astrology and alchemy. But we know those are more of pseudoscience poppycock. Well, unless you're a middle-aged woman who thinks that jerking a crystal with rainwater will make all of your wishes come true, or whatever.
A new hand touches the beacon.
Despite his innovations of spotting new stars and measuring the skies with rather impressive accuracy, he still made the oopsie of proposing his own geocentric model, which put the Earth in the center of the universe rather than the Sun. The planets revolved around the Sun, but the Sun revolved around the Earth. He almost had it. Don't worry though, Copernicus took home the blue ribbon with his heliocentric model. The thing about newer branches of science is that there's a lot to discover as you put the fundamental pieces together, which grants you a lot of leverage over outsiders looking in who just don't understand it quite yet. That being the case, many higher nobles and even the king himself applauded Tycho in his efforts, just stuffing his pockets with money to fund any and all research that he desired to advance the field of astronomy. What's that? You've charted over 700 stars? Beautiful. There's things called supernovas? Fantastic. Comets are just burning bits of rock? Amazing. Can you leave? Danish King Frederick II was so tickled by Tycho's work that he granted him an estate on an island to build his own personal, customized observatory so that he could look up at the sky in complete solidarity. And so he did. For about 21 years, Tycho plotted the planets, tracked the transits, and crunched the calculations. Everything seemed great, at least until King Frederick bit the disease dust and his 11-year-old war-obsessed, noble-hating son took over and threatened to seize Tycho's land and assets. Not wanting to deal with this two-body problem, the astronomer said screw it and shifted his orbit over to Prague, where he was invited to build another observatory. This time, however, he took on an apprentice, one Johannes Kepler, who would go on to influence many famed physicists like Galileo and Sir Isaac Newton. Together, the two continued where Tycho left off before getting booted from his Tower of Solitude. But everything came to a halt in 1601 when attending a banquet. According to Kepler, Tycho was in agonizing discomfort. You alright? Nope, gotta piss. Real bad. Dude, just get up and go. Nope, bad manners. Gotta hold it. Alright, don't complain to me when, you piss yourself.
Ooh, lordy.
Yo, Tycho. Tycho eventually headed home to drain his dragon, but at that point, it would barely even dribble. Over the next several days, the pain got excruciatingly worse, and there was no relief in sight. Just 11 days after holding in his pee to avoid bad etiquette at dinner, Tycho Brahe died of a completely avoidable bladder infection. Remember, fellas and fellettes, listen to what your body's telling you, otherwise, you might just piss it off. For poor Cornelia Zangaribandi, little is really known about her life, as the only remarkable thing about the wrinkly Diovelina was her mysterious, sudden, and fiery fate. That's because Cornelia is one of the unlucky few cases of a phenomenon known as spontaneous human combustion. A cause of death in which the victim suddenly bursts into flames seemingly unprovoked or without an obvious cause and is reduced to nothing but a pile of ash. But when you really dig deep into the dirt of these cases, you start to recognize some patterns. For one, the victims are almost always alcoholics to some degree and recently horked down a medically inadvisable amount of booze. That's the spirit, and that's the wine. Next, the victims tend to be elderly females. Not that it necessarily makes much of a difference, but combustible Cornelia here was 66 years young when she attempted to cosplay as a phoenix. Additionally, there was always an external source of ignition, which, in my opinion, completely invalidates the whole spontaneous aspect. So what did the heck happen to Cornelia? Well, on one fateful night in 1731, the Italian noblewoman had just finished off a non-stereotypical meal. Countess Cornelia was reported by her maid as acting rather, quote, dull and heavy, slomping around to and fro after downing a hefty heap of brandy. The maid helped the inebriated elder to her room, and the two spent several hours chit-chatting and shooting the shit. The countess was also a creature of habit, habitually applying some of her own personal ointment across her withering frame, an icky-sticky camphorated brandy mix which helped with her pain relief. After some bobbitying and a bit of boopying, the maid left the countess's room after she boarded the train to Sleepytime Junction. And so, all was well. Until the next morning. Cornelia was noted to be sleeping in a bit later than usual, but that was to be expected after how heavily she drank the night before. The maid eventually entered the countess's chambers to find something horrifyingly perplexing. According to the eyewitness, this is what she found. 4 feet distance from the bed was a heap of ashes, 2 legs untouched from the foot to the knee with their stockings on. Between them was the lady's head, whose brains, half of the back part of the skull, and the whole chin were burnt to ashes, amongst which were found 3 fingers blackened. All the rest was ashes. A small oil lamp on the floor was covered with ashes, but no oil in it. The Countess was dead. The curious part is that no other pieces of furniture in the room seemed to be affected by the suspected blaze. Instead, everything was draped in a greasy, smelly soot. Now, it may have appeared as a mysterious death to the people of the time, but us modern folk live in an age of true crime podcasts and such, so it's pretty easy to piece together what probably happened. Nevertheless, it's a pretty tragic way to go, but probably a good reminder to never handle open flames after converting your body into a human Molotov cocktail. The Mughal Empire was one of the richest and longest ruling empires in the history of India, but it was almost lost in its infancy. Inheriting the newly founded empire in 1530 from his dad at the age of 22, Emperor Humayun bit off way more than he could chew. He was an inexperienced ruler and lacked a lot of the self-confidence and leadership qualities that you'd expect from an emperor. But he was the eldest son, so it all went to him. Gotta love primogeniture. That, my good fellas and fellettes, is the word of the day. Now, with it being a new empire and all, there was a problem with consolidating power. Lots of the local governors and leaders resisted Mughal control. To help disperse some of that responsibility, Humayun granted some land to his 3 younger half-brothers, all of whom were little shitheads, constantly undermining their older brother to the point of collapsing the empire as a whole. Not far off, another ruler had taken notice of the young emperor's power struggle. This guy was Sher Shah Suri of Bihar, and he saw quite the opportunity in front of him. Not wanting to waste any time, he quickly gathered his army and made a push for Agra, the capital of the Mughal Empire, and one sheep's onomatopoeia away from being a Disney IP. Humayun retaliated, and the two clashed on the battlefield. After a few skirmishes, the two agreed to a diplomatic end to the fighting. Sher Shah was given control over some territory in exchange for a peaceful retreat. He agreed, but since the deal did not explicitly state no takesy-backsies, the conniving little devil immediately reneged on the agreement and slaughtered the Mughal army, with Humayun barely escaping across the Ganges. The retreating emperor pleaded with his 3 brothers for support, but they were too busy negotiating with Sher Shah over what land they would receive after their brother's demise. I told you they were shitheads. Unfortunately, Humayun did lose his empire in 1540 and was exiled to Persia for 15 years. But while in Persia, he was able to use some charisma to persuade the Safavid emperor to provide some military support so he could go back and kick the Shah's shit in, which is what happened. The Mughal Empire was restored in 1555 and all was right again. That is, until about a year later in 1556, where Humayun met a rather silly demise. When leaving his library with a handful of books, the emperor had to walk down a bunch of stone steps. Since OSHA training wasn't yet mandatory or invented, Humayun was unaware of the dangerous predicament he had put himself in. After hearing the call for daily prayer, his own muscle memory took over and he knelt down to acknowledge that call, as he did on a regular basis. But this time, he tripped, slipped, and tumbled down the entire stone stairwell, bashing his melon open on a stone corner. The poor guy died 3 days later of his injuries. But at least the Mughal Empire reigned for another 300 years, so that's a positive. Alright, I'm starting to think you enjoy getting kidnapped. This time, you're flung into feudal Japan, a rather violent era in Japanese history spanning across several hundreds of years. But this year is 1467, the start of the hostile and chaotic Sengoku period. You've really got your work cut out for you with this one. Time to put your survival skills to use, if you have any. So, do you think you're up for the task? Let's find out. Welcome to Sengoku Jidai, also known as the Warring Clans period, a dangerous time in medieval Japan's already chaotic history. See what I mean? The Sengoku period was actually a subsection of the overarching Muromachi period, but that's not too important. All you need to know is that the government is falling apart. Basically, there's this guy, the shogun. He's the ruler of Japan because he's a big, strong military man. But wait, I hear you say, I thought Japan had an emperor. And you're right, there is an emperor, and he technically rules Japan, but in reality, he's just a political figurehead that sits in the hotel cuck chair the whole time while the shogun does all the hard work to satisfy the country's freaky desires. So what the heck is causing all the ruckus? Well, the current shogun is in a bit of a pickle. All he wants to do is quit his job and retire so he can write poetry, paint, and strategically plant a few trees. Problem is, he has no son to take the reins, but he does have a war-hating monk brother. Beggars can't be choosers. Problem solved. Uh-oh, looks like the Shogun's wife Amazon primed a baby overnight. How embarrassing. Since there was a strict policy of no takesy-backsies, the Shogun's brother remains the rightful heir. Wait just one gosh darn fucking second, says Mrs. Shogun. I shot this baby out of my coot chute, so he's gonna be the heir. And thus, a power struggle began. I just want to paint. All of this instability within the shogunate caused the country to be split in two. Team Brother and Team Baby. Powerful clans waged war against each other in an attempt to get their side into power. This political shitshow inevitably led to an uncivil civil war, the Onin War. So the government's in complete shambles and anarchists rejoice. But then they have to realize that they actually have to live in an anarchy. So there's your background. Did you get all that? Glad to hear. Anyway, here you are, just outside of Kyoto, the capital city of Japan at the time, and it's just blazing with culture. And fire. Looks like the warring clans are getting a little carried away at the moment. That being the case, you're forced to roam the countryside in search of a place to anchor your roots and figure out a way back home. But you quickly learn that danger is all around you. It was fairly common for thieves or bandits to cross your path and try to yoink all your valuables, and then stab you. Speaking of the devil, here's one now, so prepare yourself. Sate sate, betsu no seizon sha.
Nani?
Oraka no koto shinai de kudasai. 自分だけだと思う。魔女も私を捕まえた。何ヶ月も前。それ以来ずっと生き残っています。そして私は続けます。
よーし。
その葉、もしかして、万助ほど、つまり、広告の中にいるのです。関係ない。死の準備を。不可能。シスター行く。彼は愛を切り借りた。精密な取り前派。滑らかな仕上がりを実現するフォイルブレード。これはスキンのセーフテクノロジーですが、私さえも。くそ、万助ほど。Well, that was a close shave. With the thief inexplicably but conveniently passed out due to being well groomed, you quickly loot him to blend in with the rest of society. Speaking of which, would you believe that feudal Japan did not operate as a hierarchy? Well, you shouldn't, because it did. So let's get out that ladder and descend through the ranks, shall we? At the tippity top was the emperor. He was the guy in charge, but not really. He had a cool shirt and that's about it. Then there's the shogun. He was actually in charge, with the power of commanding the military and controlling national policies and laws. And to be fair, he had a cooler shirt than the emperor. Directly reporting to the shogun were the daimyo, feudal lords and clan leaders that commanded various provinces around the country. They're proud of their land, but they want more. Samurai were loyal warriors with neat swords that honorably served powerful nobles like the daimyo. They were the epitome of courage and honor, and their culture is thriving to this day. Ronin were samurai without their masters, but they could still be bachelors. Ashigaru were samurai interns and general cannon fodder. Basically, they were peasants who were given swords and told to stab other people while still earning a minimum wage. Peasants. The dirt poor majority of the population that did all the work to keep everyone alive. Nowadays, they're referred to as the middle class. Artisans were the ones who made your furniture, your clothes, and your tools. That's cool, but you can't eat a chair, can you? Can you?
And which piece would you like to start with first, sir?
Oh, just the leg. Merchants were scumbag salesmen that just profited off of everyone else's work and were deemed parasites because of it. Buy high, sell low. At the very bottom, to no surprise, were the outcasts. Criminals and beggars for the most part, but also those who had undesirable jobs like butchers, undertakers, actors, entertainers, and reaction channels. Now, you have to understand that this is a very simplified structure of how feudal Japan's class system was laid out. It was a much more complicated web of relationships and rankings that is, quite frankly, above my pay grade as an outcast entertainer. So that begs the question, where would you fit in society? In reality, unless you were Chinese, Japanese, or look at these, you wouldn't have. You'd either be a social outcast or straight up sold into slavery without question. Even if you didn't end up being someone's perpetually untipped servant, you'd still end up being a peasant in some form, whether it's harvesting up rice or hauling in the fish. It was backbreaking work. From dawn until dusk, you did what you had to do to keep yourself and the country fed. After a long, exhausting day, you would get home to your cold, drafty, and very flammable home. Despite being the literal provider of the food for the country, your crops are owned by the shogunate, so you barely even have scraps to eat. Malnourishment was very common amongst the lower class, and while it often resulted in an early grave, you could also inspire a few musicians. If the starvation didn't get you, the diseases certainly would. Smallpox, measles, and chickenpox were known as the 3 great diseases. 3 great opportunities to end up 6 feet under. It's like 2 feet for each disease. But you don't have to deal with any of that. Okay, well, maybe still the disease if you're unlucky, but thanks to your recent battle, you're equipped to pass yourself off as a lowly ashigaru, a foot soldier commanded by a samurai. Since they need as much help as they can get, they won't be asking any questions. If you can hold a sword and swing it at a bad guy, that's good enough. In an event completely convenient to the plot, a samurai wanders up and recruits you to be in his army. In Japanese, of course. Thankfully, you are able to read his subtitles and accept the position. Congrats, you're now a full-fledged member of the Hosokawa clan, one of many clans spread across the country. While the Hosokawa and Yamana clans fought for the control of the capital, other clans fought to expand their own territories, and there were a bunch of them, like the Shiba clan, the Oda clan, and of course, Zelda fanboys. So let's see what your new job entails. You're now a soldier, which means you need to start learning some discipline. You wake up at the ass crack of dawn to start your day. Wake up! Eat a healthy breakfast of rice and veggies, and always practice good hygiene. You spend the morning strengthening your military skills and are partnered up with Hoshi. He's a nice guy. He was a farmer, but decided that maiming and pillaging could prove more lucrative. Together, you train martial arts, archery, and swordplay all throughout the morning as a way to keep both your body and mind sharp as attack. Whew, all that training made the time fly by. It's already noon. So after a quick lunch of rice and veggies, time to fortify the walls of the camp to make sure no bad guys get in. Build it huge. Looks like your samurai has a task for you. You've been assigned to gather intelligence from the enemy. We are in the middle of the Onin War after all, and that gosh dang Yamana clan is burning Kyoto down faster than we are. Can't let that happen. No problem, Master Sam, you say in Japanese subtitles. You wait until nightfall to carry out the mission. After a hearty dinner of rice and veggies, you infiltrate the enemy camp without causing too much suspicion. You quickly swipe the intelligence and giddily make haste back to base. With the intelligence in hand, your samurai congratulates you on a job well done. In Japanese, of course. You slowly open the letter and scan the text. Oh no. It can't be. This is...
Hi, we've been trying to reach you about your car's extended warranty.
Ah, shit. You stole the clan leader's mail by accident. Wait, there's a note. You're not the best at reading Japanese text, but you think you can make out what the message means. Looks like your next mission starts at dawn. Oh yeah, it's wartime. You better get dressed, champ. You've got a country to die for. Unlucky for you, early Ashigaru were not well equipped for battle. Remember that they were dirt poor farmers. They couldn't afford ornate weapons, so they had to make do with what they had, which was farming equipment. Ever just want to shove a shovel into someone's throat just to see what would happen? And now you can. It kills them. One weapon of choice was the kama, a simple sickle-like weapon suited for slicing and stabbing some sneaky suckers. If you get the DLC, you can slap a chain on that bad boy, granting you a lethal radius of several feet and allowing you to open that pit up. Ashigaru that were well-trained or well-funded had access to better weapons and armor. Perhaps the most effective weapon that they could wield was the yari, a long spear that could be outfitted with all kinds of blades. Want to stab? Go for the omi yari. Want to slash? Try the katakama yari. If you want to support the boys from afar, get yourself a yumi, an asymmetrical longbow which was deadly on the battlefield with an effective range of over 400 feet. Archers were a core support group in any army. They would riddle the battlefield using a reliable method of spray and pray. It's just a shame that friendly fire was always on. If you wanted to spice things up, you could opt for fire or even explosive arrows. As for armor, it varied. The best Ashigaru were absolutely strapped with thick leather chest pieces, helmets, sleeves, and greaves. They were usually fitted with metal plates for added protection. Low-ranking Ashigaru were fitted with a cheaper, easier-to-produce armor called jack shit. Whatever clothing they had was their best bet. But it should be noted that the spoils of war were generous. Ashigaru were allowed to pillage and loot whoever they attacked. Slay an enemy with better weapons and armor? Looks like you found an upgrade. Now that you're all equipped, it's time to storm the battlefield with your best friend Samurai. What a cool guy. No. They got Sam. That's it. You charge into battle to avenge your fallen mentor. You spot an enemy, but it's a familiar face. Hoshi? You switched sides? Yeah, much better loot, says Hoshi, in Japanese of course. Just then, you notice fire spreading to a nearby building. Well, that's gonna suck, eh? Ugh, you again? Kyoku-naku, hito no ke wa sorenaide kudasai. "15 minutes of useless history. Wait, what?" Poland had a bear soldier that served during World War II. His name was Wojtek, and he was a good boy. In 1386, France executed a pig that killed a child. It was arrested, faced trial, and was hanged. Poor thing. During the Great Depression, people would often resort to using potato sacks as clothes. Ancient Mayans worshipped turkeys, as they were seen as vessels for the gods. The 69th and 420th words of the Declaration of Independence are "to" and "districts." The Ford Motor Company was founded in 1903 and hasn't produced a good car since. It's said that in Ohio in 1895, only 2 cars existed across the entire cursed state. And they crashed into each other. Famous scientist Albert Einstein was once offered the presidency of Israel. He turned it down. The British Empire had around 120 colonies at its height in the 20th century. Robert Lincoln, son of US President Abraham Lincoln, was present or nearby during 3 different presidential assassinations. He was just a few blocks away from the Ford Theater when Papa Abraham caught a bullet in the back of his skull. He was an eyewitness to President Garfield's assassination, and also experienced President McKinley getting absolutely cannoned in the chest. Afterward, little Bobby Lincoln refused any future invites to presidential events. William Higginbotham, a physicist who worked on the atomic bomb, invented the first video game in 1958 using an oscilloscope. He called his creation Tennis for Two. It was a precursor to Pong. About 4% of the Normandy beaches are made up of leftover shrapnel from the D-Day invasions of World War II. The first European settlement in present-day Uruguay was formed in 1527. It was called San Lazaro and was, you guessed it, a Spanish settlement. Ancient Roman warships were equipped with huge fucking flamethrowers that were used in naval warfare. They called it Greek fire, and boy was it effective. In the year 1204, Valdemar II of Denmark was recognized as king in Norway. Ketchup used to be sold as medicine in the 1830s. George Washington died on December 14, 1799 at the age of 67. His last words were, "'Tis well." In ancient Greece, skirts were considered manly and pants were for women. Nothing like letting the boys breathe, you know?
The record for the world's longest stare was set in 2011 in Australia. The loving glare lasted 41 minutes straight and 0 minutes gay.
French monarch King Charles VI suffered from a psychological disorder called the glass delusion, where he was thoroughly convinced that his entire being was made out of glass, and thus likely to shatter into pieces at the slightest poke. He wore clothes enforced with iron rods and prevented anyone from touching him. In 1633, the Shanxi province in Imperial China was ground zero to the Great Plague in the late Ming Dynasty. More than half of the population got sick that year, and over 90% of the province's population was dead 9 years later. The Roman Colosseum used to be covered in marble, but after Rome fell, the marble was looted by big titty goth pillagers. The Mariana Trench was first discovered in 1875. It is measured at about 36,000 feet or 11,000 meters deep at its lowest point. Dr. John Kellogg, creator of the famous cereal brand, invented cornflakes and graham crackers to prevent his patients from gooning. The ancient African city of Timbuktu was founded in the 5th century. It served as a popular trade route for salt, gold, and people begrudgingly forced to work for free. During the 18th century in England, carrying around a pineapple was a telltale sign that you were rich as hell. Haters gonna hate, bruh. The chainsaw was invented by medical doctors as a tool for symphysiotomy, a procedure for aiding in childbirth. There's an ancient text called the Voynich manuscript, handwritten in an unknown language that has never been deciphered. Wait, what's that say? Oh, would you look at that? Famous silly named astronomer Galileo Galilei discovered the planet of Jupiter using a handheld telescope in 1610. So you know how the US government banned alcohol during the Prohibition in the 1920s and 1930s? Well, people still wanted to get absolutely slizzard, so they resorted to stealing and drinking industrial alcohol. You know, like rubbing alcohol used to treat wounds? Yeah, you're not supposed to drink that stuff because industrial alcohol is commonly denatured, meaning that toxic additives like kerosene or acetone are mixed in to prevent people from drinking it. What's fun is that this didn't really stop anyone from power chugging the stuff so they could feel all wavy and wiggly. The mass consumption resulted in the deaths of around 10,000 Americans. Cheers. The most successful pirate in history was a woman. Qing Shi was the commander of the Chinese Red Flag Fleet, which consisted of over 300 warships and about 80,000 crew. Move over, Blackbeard. About 90% of the world's freshwater is frozen in Antarctica's ice shelves. Humanity's been trying to melt it out of there for ages. In 1998, over 1,200 human bones were found in Benjamin Franklin's house. They were used to study human anatomy. Or so they say. Pablo Picasso's first painting was called El Picador, which he created at just 8 years old. It sucked. I wrote most of this script on February 29th, 2024. Happy leap year. Pope Gregory IX declared war on cats. Roman Emperor Caligula declared war on the sea. Athletes in the ancient Olympics competed completely naked to show off the guns and show off the buns. The word robot comes from the Czech word robota, meaning forced labor. The year 536 is commonly referred to as the worst year in history to be alive. A volcanic eruption in Europe farted out enough dust and debris to cause a multi-year winter. The lack of sunlight dropped average global temperatures by several degrees, causing crop failure and famine in Europe and Asia. Oh yeah, and then the plague showed up. Napoleon's horse was named Marengo. Established in the year 930, Iceland has the oldest parliament in the world. The 13th Grand Duke of Lithuania was Jogaila Algirdaitis. He was also King of Poland. According to a 2021 census, 55% of Isle of Man residents identify as Christian, 44% aren't religious at all. Abraham Lincoln was a licensed bartender. The first capital of the ancient city of Assyria was Ashur. Now you can get across the Bridge of Death.
What is the capital of Assyria?
Ashur.
Right, off you go.
The very first known written language is Sumerian, with the earliest known usage dating back to 3100 BC in Mesopotamia. The German MG42 machine gun used in World War II has a firing rate of up to 1,500 rounds per minute with an effective range of up to 2,000 meters. In the Roman Empire, a triumvir monetalis was someone who minted coins. The Great Fire of London in 1666 started in a small bakery and quickly engulfed the majority of the city for 4 days. Firefighting methods at the time were no more than buckets of water or destroying other buildings to stop the spread. In the end, 85% of the city's residents were now homeless. On the bright side, only 6 people reportedly died, so there's a spark of positivity. The Ottoman Empire was founded in 1299 and fell in 1922. At the end of World War II, Russian citizens decided to party hard. So hard, in fact, that the entire country's vodka reserves were tapped out in just 22 hours. Nostrovia. In 1973, Chinese Supreme Communist overlord Mao Zedong offered the United States 10 million Chinese women. As a joke. Instead, he ended up killing 40 to 80 million people during his totalitarian dictatorship. It was supposed to be a great leap forward, Mao. A popular fad in the 1950s was phone booth stuffing, and just like my romantic endeavors, it didn't last long. Julius Caesar was stabbed 23 times. Rich people in 19th century Europe were in harsh competition for who could collect the most unique and rare orchids. Too bad none of them pulled a Black Lotus. Alexander the Great named over 20 cities after himself during his conquering of over 2 million square miles of land by age 30. What have you done with your life? In 1953, US President Dwight Dimmadome Eisenhower was lassoed by cowboy Marty Montana on horseback during his inauguration speech. Nintendo was founded in 1889 by Fusajiro Yamauchi to produce Hanafuda playing cards. Famed philosopher Socrates didn't really like written words. He believed it was an inefficient way to communicate knowledge and that it would make people lazy and ruin their ability to use the power of memory to recall information. Thus, people would rely on text to retrieve information instead of fully understanding concepts. As a result, the stubborn asshole never wrote anything down. J.R.R. Tolkien's full name was John Ronald Reuel Tolkien. You read the Harry Potter books, right? The Laotian Civil War lasted 16 years, 6 months, 1 week, and 2 days. Despite how old you think it was, the Aztec Empire was actually founded in 1428. King Henry VIII had 4 butt-wiping servants called Grooms of the Stool. For their services, all 4 were formally knighted. At the start of World War I, the US Air Force had only 18 pilots and 12 airplanes. In ancient Asia, death by elephant was a popular execution method. Germany fully controlled 4 colonies during the scramble for Africa in the 1800s and 1900s. They included territories in modern-day Burundi, Cameroon, Namibia, Rwanda, Tanzania, and Togo. On average, Germany uncovers about 2,000 tons of unexploded bombs every year. The wealthy class in Victorian England loved making themselves as white as possible, so they would eat and bathe in arsenic to lighten their complexion. The first version of the internet, called ARPANET, began as a connection between 2 computers in California in 1969. It eventually branched out to multiple computers for research purposes and information sharing, forming an intercommunication network, shortened to Internetwork, and shortened more to the internet. Nowadays, you can watch someone press their feet into a webcam halfway across the world for $3.99 an hour. Or so I've heard. China was actually the first country to use paper money all the way back in the 7th century because coins were just too dang heavy for merchants to lug around all the time. Roman gladiator blood was once used as a cure for epilepsy. It didn't work. Using forks to eat food used to be considered offensive to God since he gave you hands to eat with. In the 1856 Belgian general election, Catholics won the Chamber of Representatives 63-45 against the Liberal Party. The Secretary of the Navy during the United States Civil War was Gideon Welles. He had 8 children. The first modern Olympic Games were held in Athens, Greece in 1896. The first silver medalist, gold medals didn't exist yet, was American James B. Connolly in the triple jump. Winston Churchill reportedly smoked up to 15 cigars a day. Private George Price of the Canadian Army was the last casualty of World War I. On November 11, 1918, he was hit in the chest by a sniper at 10:58 a.m. in Mons, Belgium, 2 minutes before the war officially ended. Sorry about that. The first emperor of Japan was legendary Emperor Jimmu, a claimed descendant of the sun god Amaterasu, though there is no evidence that he actually existed. Robert Liston was a British surgeon in the 1800s famous for his swift surgeries. In a time where the best anesthetics were a shot of whiskey and a stick to bite on, speed was critical to minimize pain. During his most famous surgery, Liston set a leg amputation 80% record in just 2.5 minutes flat, severing the fingers of his assistant and accidentally stabbing a nearby spectator. All 3 men died. Basketball was invented in 1891 by Canadian-American physician James Naismith. You put ball in basket. Fun. During World War II, Americans called hamburgers Liberty Steaks and sauerkraut Liberty Cabbage. The weather in Phoenix, Arizona in the US on April 20th, 1969 at around 5 p.m. was 90 degrees Fahrenheit with winds east-southeast at 8 miles per hour. The Lebanese city of Tyre was founded in 2750 BC. The first instance of income tax in the US started in 1861 to raise funds for the Civil War. Anyone making over $800, or the equivalent of $28,000 today, was taxed a flat rate of 3%. Marie Antoinette's music teacher was a German opera composer by the name of Christoph Willibald Gluck. The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time came out in November of 1998, and I'm still playing it. No witches were actually burned alive during the Salem witch trials. Instead, they were just hanged, which is quicker and doesn't smell as bad. In 1644, eating pie was banned in England. Meat pies, fruit pies, your wife's pie, all of them. Prince Louis Rwagasore of Burundi is regarded as a national hero. He led a political resistance against Belgium and demanded independence from the colonizers. He was elected second prime minister of Burundi in 1961 and served his country for 2 weeks before he was assassinated by political opponents. Burundi was granted independence from Belgium a year later. The Kingdom of Karagwe in modern-day Tanzania was disestablished in 1963. Adolf Hitler helped design the Volkswagen Beetle. A carrier pigeon named Commando successfully carried out over 90 missions during World War II. He even got a medal. The fifth leader of the Soviet Union was Leonid Brezhnev, and the guy had eyebrows for days. The 27th state added to the US was Florida. Despite humans being around for over 200,000 years, written history is only 6,000 years old, so who knows what they did? Probably hucked rocks at each other. The Industrial Revolution in the US began in 1760 and lasted all the way until 1840. The popular game Jenga experienced a lull of sales in 2001 because Jenga towers weren't the only ones to fall that year. Silk was first used in clothing back in China in 3630 BC. Silky smooth. During the stock market crash of 1929, the Dow Jones Index, which tracks 30 of the biggest US companies, fell 89% when it bottomed out in the summer of 1932. It took 22 years to get back to pre-crash heights. That's why I invest responsibly. All on red.
Horrifying mythical creatures that you've never heard of. Seldom would you find tales of critters and creatures more terrifying than those from Southeast Asia, places like the diesel of nightmare fuel. First up is the Pontianak, a malevolent spirit with a bone to pick. Specifically yours, all 206 of them. Originating from the likes of Malaysian and Indonesian folklore, the Pontianak is said to be the vengeful spirit of a pregnant woman who either died in childbirth or at the hands of her partner. So imagine that you're taking a midnight Malaysian stroll, slurping down a Malaysian meal of Malaysian soup. Through the aroma of boiling broth and steamy veggies, your nose catches the subtle scent of flowers, your ears, the delicate cry of an infant. It's just then that you spot a figure in the dark, standing beneath a big, beautiful, bountiful banana tree. Gracefully creeping into the moonlight is a young woman, clad in a flowing white dress with silky, long, raven black hair, and friggin' sweet honkers. But that's how they get you. Seduction is the Pontianak's weapon of choice, at least for the initial bait. But as long as you're a nice guy, you should have nothing to fear. And not the Reddit definition of a nice guy. Cheaters, beaters, and legend leaguers all face a terrible fate should they cross the path of a Pontianak, so approach at your own risk. If you do find yourself overcome with the manly urge to try to pick up a ghostly gal in the middle of the night, you'll notice a few things as you make your move. For one, that delightful floral scent quickly turns to pure putrescence. Her soft pale hands now don razor-sharp nails, and her delicate face now bears bloodthirsty fangs. You're in for a rough encounter. The Pontianak has a purely physical attack style, so keeping your distance would have been wise. If you survive the shock of her terrifying appearance, you're gonna wish that you hadn't, as all of your pain receptors will now be the ones screaming. Speaking of which, a Pontianak may choose to let out a deafening wail, capable of rupturing your eardrums. But bleeding ears are the least of your worries, cause soon you'll have a bleeding belly. As a symbolic gesture for the child that she was never able to bear, a Pontianak will take her terrifying talons and tear through your trembling tummy, stealing your stomach, looting your liver, and kidnapping your kidneys. Why? Because they taste good? But if you don't feel like having your insides being converted to outsides, here's what you can do. First and most obvious, don't approach crying women in the middle of the night. It's a huge red flag. Walk on. That's someone else's problem. Second, take a glance down at her piggies. Legends state that Pontianaks have gross feet, so this may be a warning sign to hightail it out of there. Or she might just have gross feet. As a third option, albeit a bit expensive, is that Pontianaks apparently hate the sound of cannon blasts, so if you're facing peril, have her stare down a barrel. Fourth, final, and most effective if you find yourself about to be shredded to bits, is managing to get behind the spooky spirit and jamming an iron nail into the nape of her neck. This is the Pontianak's factory reset spot, rendering her docile, subdued, and apparently according to some strange versions of the legend, she will become quote-unquote the perfect wife, at least until the nail is removed. Then she just gets back to her murderous ways. Now we jump ship from Southeast Asia to the forests of West Africa with the Sosobonsam. The OG jump scarer, this slippery little devil, hides in the canopies of the forests of Ghana, waiting for its next victim to wander through the woods. The beings are said to be huge, much larger than an average human, with jaws capable of swallowing a head whole in one gulp.
Although oddly proportioned, the Sosobonsam is ape-like in appearance with gangly, dangly arms and legs and a slender torso, often depicted with dark or red-colored fur. Using its iron hook feet to grip a grasp on ganyan growth, the Sosobonsam lurks in the trees awaiting its prey. Once spotted, the monster will wiggle its fingies in delight with a "don't mind if I do" attitude, like it's about to grab the last hot dog out of the warm Wawa hot dog cabinet. Going in for the kill, the Sosobonsam swings from the tree limbs to snatch and grab any would-be traveler, should they be caught unawares alone in the dead of night. The monster's monstrous arms envelop you in a deadly death hug, crushing your bones and internals. Luckily, this will most likely send you to the Shadow Realm before it ever gets a chance to feed on your remains. If you are more of a cautious individual, the Sosobonsam may attempt to disarm or disorient you with its ability to mimic familiar sounds.
Oh, what was that?
Once you've been thrown off course, your life expectancy quickly drops to mere seconds as the swinging vampire monkey man makes its move. But if you don't want to end up a monkey man's meal, there are precautions that you can take. For one, never travel alone in the forest at night. It's kind of the takeaway lesson for this legend. Travel with a companion to avoid an untimely demise and to spark good conversation.
And I told the guy, no tomato on the sandwich. And what does he do? He puts extra tomatoes on it. I mean, that's just ridiculous.
Fuck up.
You know, it wasn't even.
Additionally, protective charms blessed by your local village priest are said to ward off the creatures as they hate the taste of religion. But if these simple solutions just don't seem possible, don't worry, for another solution is already in the making, and you can thank chocolate. Now, before you embarrassingly offer a bar to the beast, let me explain. You see, Sosobonsams thrive in the trees, so let's just get rid of the trees. Thanks to excessive cocoa farming, Ghana has lost a majority of its primary forest since the 1950s. Sure, the trees are gone, but so is this fictitious freak. Strap on some earmuffs, cause this next creature's a real screecher. Slopped out of southern Slavic folklore is the Drekavac, which translates to the Screamer. This myth takes on many forms across several different variations of its story, but for this video, we will go with its infant form. The Drekavac is said to be the restless spirit of an unbaptized child, desperate for salvation. According to legend, the Drekavac takes the form of a gray, emaciated young child. Little limber limbs accompany its frail stature, offset only by its monstrously large dome, which definitely devastated a birth canal upon entry into this world. They are most prevalent around Christmas time, sure to put a damper on anyone's festivities, but they certainly will not go unnoticed. Problem is, one glance at this little fellow will make you go, ugh. Not a thought exists behind its bulging, glassy black eyes. No thought, but death. If it wasn't obvious by its name, the Drekavac is capable of emitting eardrum-rupturing shrieks, able to bring you to your knees in a single squeal. Yeah, like that. Now, the Drekavac itself is not an immediate threat in terms of it wanting to convert you into a fresh marinara. Instead, it serves as a looming omen. It is said that those who find themselves in its shadow are doomed to die a terrible death in the coming days. Whole villages may suffer cruel fates should they spot one nearby. The legend itself is often used as a deterrent for young children, teaching them to not wander too far from home lest they cross paths with the diminutive demon. Strange howls or yells in the night from local wildlife are often attributed to the Drekavac as a way to prove their existence to traumatized children. I mean, some of us were told that a giant anthropomorphic rabbit breaks into our houses once a year to leave us candy offerings in exchange for good behavior, so is it really that far-fetched? Parents do a lot to make sure that their kids behave, don't they? Honestly, I can't wait to tell Little Chat one day about how a small fairy will break in through his window to steal his dead teeth in exchange for a few bucks. Well, like most critters, the Drekavac can be defeated. The most obvious method is having the child properly baptized, finally putting its soul to rest. So, just have your friendly neighborhood priest join the party and cast holy on its unholy ass. Or, you know, splash a cup of holy water in its face. Rest in peace. Japanese folklore. Definitely a very creative culture for instilling fear into kids and adults alike. After all, we need to balance the uwu anime girls with something a bit more fearsome. The Teki Teki does just that. Born from tragedy, this ghastly ghoul is the result of a young woman or schoolgirl who had fallen or was pushed onto train tracks and failed to get out of the way in time, causing her to become 50% lighter, but 100% angrier. I prefer the story of it being a malicious push, as simply just falling onto the train tracks is your own fault. Stay behind the yellow line at all times, people. Being a vengeful spirit, or Unria, the Teki Teki is a violent little vixen, aiming to hunt down the living who wander around deserted locations or train tracks in the middle of the night. Her existence serves solely as a cautionary tale for kids, discouraging any late-night adventures to such places. It's interesting the tales that parents come up with to protect their children. So instead of it being like, "Alright, Dad, I'm going to that old abandoned factory with some friends." The hell you are, that place isn't safe. It's more like, "Alright, Dad, I'm going to that old abandoned factory with some friends." Sure, no problem, just make sure you don't get murdered by
The Factory Fingerer.
What? Any encounter with a Teki Teki could be your last. While they are just a half-body apparition of a young girl, they're still a force to be reckoned with. You may first become aware of its arrival by the sound of its hands slapping on the cement, which is how it walks, and the origin of its onomatopoeic name. In some tellings of the story, she carries a small scythe as a weapon. Others, she bears razor-sharp nails. If approached, she may ask you a simple question.
Where are my legs?
In Japanese, of course. This is a trick question. She ain't got no legs, Lieutenant Dan. Though, if you see a ghostly gal with her insides spilling out lumbering towards you on her hands, it should be common sense that you 180 the hell out of there. But you'd be wrong. Although she is restricted to just arms for movement, she is noted to be incredibly fast, even able to catch up to cars if necessary. Once she gets a hold of you, she will treat you to a similar fate as her own, using her scythe or nails to crack you open like a football Sunday beer can. Now, according to legend, and unfortunately for you, there's no clear way to defeat her, mainly just heeding the tale's warning to avoid deserted areas and train tracks. However, I'm sure a solid 45-yard field goal attempt could get the job done. What's scarier than a skeleton? A giant skull that flies. Originating from the folklore of the Iroquois or Haudenosaunee Native Americans surrounding the Great Sacandaga Lake in upstate New York, this sizable skull monster is the stuff of nightmares. Dubbed the Ganastistonje, this disembodied man-eating head's goal is to consume anything and everything. Men, women, children, entire villages, Prilosec, you name it. These dirigible domes are said to be the cursed souls of ones who have engaged in cannibalism or other various horrific acts within their lifetime. Thus, they are doomed to roam the earth with the curse of insatiable hunger. These heads can take the form of just mere skulls, but some versions of the tale depict them as full-fleshed faces with long flowing hair, either with feathered or bat-like wings. Their description reminds me a lot of those skulls from the Zelda franchise, particularly that one giant fella in the bottom of the well in Ocarina of Time. But I digress. It is said that even speaking about them attracts them to an area, as they have been known to descend on entire villages who keep their legend alive. Once summoned, these monsters begin wreaking havoc, biting and tearing victims apart, or swallowing them in one gulp, only to have to bite them immediately after, since they have no stomach. Their speed and sheer size makes escape nearly impossible. Even if you're hiding in a house like a little frightened mouse or scared as all hell while hidden in a well, they'll attack your shack for a crack at a tender little snack. In terms of defeating them, you're kind of SOL, as legends state that the Ganastistonje is virtually immortal and thus cannot be destroyed, save for one primitive weapon: fire. So get out your lighter and your pocket can of body spray and get to it. Neat. Dangerous cryptids and how to fight them. Takalishe are mischievous little critters whose only goal is to cause complete chaos, which is really annoying considering how relatively non-threatening they look. Originating from Zulu mythology in the South African country of South Africa, Takalishe are said to be pale little gremlin or goblin-like creatures with big ol' kissable lips, grotesque pointy ears, hollow eye sockets, long bony fingies, and perhaps their most notable feature, a big gaping hole in their melon, which is supposedly their source of power. Oh yeah, as if just causing a general ruckus wasn't annoying enough, the little guys also have the power to turn invisible. All they have to do is chug some water to plummet their opacity down to 0, then they're just free to slap your knees without being detected. It's pretty common amongst South African residents to hear tales of the Takalishe, often as a deterrent to young children to not wander off or stay up late, lest one come in the night and munch their toes off. But if you ever find yourself confronted by one of these little fellas, there are a few things you can do to fight back. The most common tactic involves propping your bed up on some cinder blocks like it was a car left alone for 5 minutes in North Philadelphia. The added height will deter the miniature mongrel from being able to climb up and harass you. While you're pointing and laughing at the thing, take the opportunity to huck a lamp at it and knock it out cold. Next, tie the sucker up with some common bedroom rope and pour some of your healthy supply of spare battery acid down the critter's gaping head hole. That'll teach him. Time to take a trip down to like the one country any American knows in South America. Brazil. It is within this crime-ridden hellhole that you can find the Corpo Seco. It's a malicious zombie-like creature who was once just like you and me. According to Brazilian folklore, a Corpo Seco is created after a person dies and is rejected by both heaven and hell. Thus, the creature is cursed to roam the earth for all eternity with the sole goal of terrifying the living. Besides being a great reminder to stay hydrated, the Corpo Seco looks like your typical zombie, an emaciated corpse with completely dry skin and long fingernails. It's nothing but skin and bones. Actually, the name Corpo Seco translates to dry body, so that makes sense. Some Brazilian parents who want to keep their little crianças in line may offer a twist to the legend. Instead, they may insist that a Corpo Seco is created from children who disrespect or mistreat their parents. You gotta love good parenting. Little side note here, you ever go to like a Home Depot or a large hardware store where they have them big boxes up on the top racks? Yeah, no joke, my dad used to tell me that that's where they would put bad kids, and I'm a better person for it. Love you, Dad. Well, we all know that the best way to discard your run-of-the-mill zombie is to exercise your Second Amendment rights, or the Brazilian equivalent. Since the poor fellow has no muscular structure, he isn't going anywhere anytime soon, which allows you to get in some hefty target practice. Imagine you're just chilling on the calm high seas trying to catch some fresh tuna when all of a sudden, oh, come on. This is an umebozu, and he's pissed.
What you doing in my waters?
Umebozu are Japanese spirits described as several meter tall humanoid black figures which reside in oceans, seas, and bays. They are believed to be the vengeful spirits of monks who were previously murdered and cast into the sea. Don't know who's going around murdering monks and dunking them overboard, but hey, stuff happens. The calm ocean waves quickly turn into a chaotic nightmare as your ship is tossed and turned like a turd in a toilet. This all could have been avoided if you just sacrificed a little bit of your tuna catch, but shoulda, coulda, woulda. But fear not, there is a solution to this problem. Upon rising from the depths, the umebozu will demand a barrel from the sailors it encounters. If you present the barrel to the big nude dude, he will be most thankful, returning his gratitude by completely reducing your ship to toothpicks. Your best bet is to actually give him a bottomless barrel, which will just end up confusing the big umebozo as you laugh and sail away at a whopping 5 miles per hour. But if that also fails, you could always just radio in a volley of shells from the 460mm Type 94 triple turrets mounted on your backup battleship, the Yamato. There's nothing quite like a Filipino vampire baby to put a damper on your day, or night. Enter the Chinook, a chubby little Filipino vampire baby. But don't be fooled by its sort of non-threatening appearance, because they're actually pretty dangerous. Chinooks are said to attract human prey by lying on the ground near forest paths and crying their little heads off, prompting passersby to be like, "Can you shut the fuck up?" But some more altruistic pedestrians may approach the infant in an attempt to rescue it. Wrong move. Your empathetic nature just cost you your life. And that's what you get for trying to be a savior. In your last conscious moments of severe torture pain, you may ask yourself, where did this Chinook even come from? While some believers in the Filipino community claim that the terrifying tyke is the offspring between a respectable young woman and a horrifying but equally respectable demon. After doing the do and slopping out the nefarious newborn, the new parents make like a tree and fuck off. This, understandably, angers the baby, who quickly develops abandonment issues while its mother brags to her friends about being dicked down by a literal demon. Thanks to multiple trauma-induced synapse connections, it has no choice but to seek vengeance on anyone unfortunate enough to come across it, like you. So in the event that you approach an abandoned crying demon baby, be sure to quickly give it the old factory reset by jamming your finger into its soft spot. This will instantly calm the beast while simultaneously destroying all cognitive ability. Now, you can lease it out to sweatshops to make a steady side income. If you ever needed an excuse to stay away from the Arctic, the Kalapilawit might be what you're looking for. This absolute horror stems from Inuit mythology way up in the Great White North. Guaranteed to make anyone with thalassophobia's toes curl, the caterpillar waits just below the icy waters for a potential victim. They are described as scaly humanoid creatures with a female appearance and a unique but pungent sulfurous odor. So they're smelly fart fishwomen. According to legend, they are said to be child snatchers, preying on any unattended children wandering the Arctic beaches or playing on sea ice. So one moment you may be looking out at little Johnny Yes Papa having the time of his life as he ever so safely jumps up and down on drifting sea ice, while the next he is snatched up and dragged down into the watery depths. Once your kid is snatched, there's really not much you can do. They're doomed to reside in one of these stinky fishwoman's many robe pockets, or at least for as long as they can hold their breath. So how can you avoid or defeat the creature? Well, for one, don't leave your young children unattended in an Arctic setting, or really any setting. Caterpillars aren't the only monsters out there willing to snatch kids up. But if you do want to have your child create memories of playing on the ice and you're sticking nearby, there's no shame in keeping your trusty mallet on hand. Oh boy, shadow people. Probably one of the most commonly spotted cryptids on this list. Heck, you may have even seen one recently, or will soon. They look like pretty much how you would think. They're just black figures with little to no discernible features, just menacing shadows of where people might be. While some may be more of a transparent misty figure, others can appear to be blacker than black, with you being able to see them in complete darkness. These things are terrifying and are one of the most common sleep paralysis demons. Speaking of which, perhaps one of the most famous shadow people is the Hat Man, a dark, foreboding figure that stares at you while you sleep in the darkest corner of your room. He is commonly depicted with eerily soft glowing red eyes and sporting a wide-brimmed hat. Just the sight of him alone is enough to make your blood run cold and your heart stop. Other shadow people are said to be detected out of the corner of one's eye but vanish when trying to catch a glimpse. So actually back in the day, I had this one incident where I was absolutely shredding on Guitar Hero 3. I was trying to get through FCP Remix on Expert, and I remember that my hearing just started going out. It was like I could only hear TV static. And not only that, I actually started getting tunnel vision, so my peripherals were blacking out and the TV static was getting louder and louder. But the moment that I actually started to take notice to it and I whipped my big dumb head around, that's when everything just kind of returned back to normal. So I don't know if that was a shadow person or if I was just extremely sleep deprived and experiencing the side effects of staring at a screen and standing for several hours, but probably the latter. Anyway, if you want to avoid any and all shadow people from popping up in your life, there's really only one solution. You're gonna always need to be in a room that's brightly lit from multiple angles to eliminate any shadows. Sure, your sanity and your electric bill's gonna take a beating, but hey, at least you won't be seeing any shadow people. The bloop. Now this one's a bit of a mystery, as the only evidence for its existence is a small clip of audio picked up from a deep-sea hydrophone far off the coast of South America in 1997. The audio is of an extremely loud, low-frequency sound from the Pacific Ocean's darkest depths. The sound was actually so loud that it could be heard from over 5,000 kilometers, or about 54,000 Statue of Liberties, away. Take a listen. Some might think that the audio is just your dad mowing the lawn again at 7 in the morning, even though the HOA has told them multiple times to have the common courtesy to start after 9. But others find the audio to be distressing and mysterious, leading to rumors and whispers of the bloop, a terrifying aquatic supergiant that has proportions way beyond what we have previously known to be possible for deep-sea creatures. Some have argued that in order to produce such low-frequency vibrations, the creature would have to be over 250 feet long, over 2.5 times the length of a blue whale, the largest known animal on Earth. So is it a nightmare-inducing ultra-mega whale capable of casually deep-throating other whales? Or is it something a little bit more scientifically reasonable? Well, that's what a gaggle of smart fellas wanted to figure out, and through years of some pencil pushing, a lot of Greek letters, and additional audio recordings, a discovery was made. In 2005, scientists had confirmed that the bloop was audio captured from a non-tectonic cryoseism. Basically, some ice broke off of an iceberg somewhere. Well, since the bloop isn't actually a gargantuan monster and is just an iceberg, that means you can do this. Spring-heeled Jack, rarely referred to as Jumboots Jamstrang by a select few, is a humanoid cryptid that was active in Victorian England. This bouncy butthole is basically what kids thought life would be like when they begged their parents for moon shoes. The name is derived from the man-like creature's ability to perform acrobatic leaps well beyond the capabilities of any normal human, hopping up to rooftops in a single bound. Parkour! Looking like a rejected British Batman, Spring-heeled Jack was first spotted in the early 1800s in London, England, and he was quite the bastard, performing all kinds of despicable deeds, such as leaping onto carriages and crashing them, or assaulting young women and ripping their shirts with his metallic claws. The most famous sighting came from a young woman in 1838 who claimed that one night a man impersonating a police officer had lured her into the street. When she shed some candlelight upon him, it revealed a grotesque face and burning red eyes. She had claimed that the man spewed white and blue flames at her and leapt towards her, cutting her neck and breast with his sharp metal claws before being scared off by the woman's sister who came to the rescue. Just 9 days later, another young woman had a similar encounter, stating that a man had spit blue fire in her face and attacked her. And before you suggest it, no, Jack the Ripper didn't surface until 50 years after these incidents, so it was highly unlikely that it was the same person. So how do you fight back against a jumpy jerk like Spring-heeled Jack? Just keep a pocket knife on you. A good slice to both Achilles tendons will do the trick. This one's a real hoot. Originating from the Andros Island of the Bahamas, the Chickcharney is a big ol' barn owl. This ornithic nightmare stands at 3 feet tall with creepy long legs, a large wingspan, and humanoid arms used to twist the heads of its victims.
Mr. Owl.
Since it is but a simple owl, it possesses the ability of flight and exceptional night vision, but it can also somehow manipulate probability, allowing it to bestow good luck or bad luck. Give it to me straight, doctor. Is my wife gonna live? Probably. Ah, wait, never mind. But it has to be said, even though it is a big dangerous bird, it's still a bird nonetheless. And what better way to get rid of a big old bird than with a big old musket? And with that, you now have what it takes to survive against some cryptids. You know, if they were real.